So today my goal is to give you a little bit of the story of Chanukah, because as we approach the holiday of Chanukah, a lot of us have this Hebrew school understanding of the Chanukah story. Either we got the classic Jewish holiday idea, which is, they tried to kill us, we were saved, let's eat. Or, we just heard different things and different little pieces and watered down versions of the story, pieces of the story, and we have a 4-year-old understanding of what went down Chanukah time. So now that we're not 4 years old anymore, worthwhile, if you are a Jew or an interested party, to learn about what actually happened in Chanukah's story historically, and also the spiritual underpinnings that were going on as well, to understand it from a spiritual perspective as well. And so it's worthwhile to not just stay with these things that we think we know because we heard when we were a kid. I'll tell you what, if you heard something about Judaism when you were a kid, I guarantee you don't know that thing. Guaranteed, right? Because you're going into it with the 4-year-old understanding. You're not 4 years old anymore, and whatever Judaism has to offer is more than a 4-year-old understanding. Cool? L'chaim. So we're going to jump into it. So I want to take you back to the times of the beginning of the Second Temple period. Okay, so this is before Chanukah. There's a few generations before the Chanukah story, but you have to understand the historical context. Okay, so it's the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash period, and let's understand the Jewish people there was the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and that was around for approximately 410 years. Then that temple, the Beit HaMikdash, was destroyed, and the Jewish people went into exile. It was destroyed by the Babylonians, and the Jewish people went into exile for 70 years. Okay, the Jewish people then, Persia took over, and the Jewish people were allowed back in. And so you'd think that the people who would come back would be like, oh, these righteous, pious people who wanted to come back and wanted to rebuild a temple and all that. But interestingly enough, it wasn't exactly that way. A lot of people who were heads of the Jewish community, heads of the Torah community, were involved in Babylon, in Babylonia over there. And there were, and so really Ezra and Nehemiah, who were prophets, or I don't want to go into the specifics of were they prophets, were they not, they were definitely righteous Jewish leaders. They bring the Jewish people back to Israel, but the people who come with Ezra and Nehemiah weren't necessarily the most quote unquote fervently passion observant Jews. Believe it or not, the 70 years of exile had done its course on the Jewish people. I mean, think about where we are now, right? Where we are now is, we are at a place now where it's like 2,000 years of Jewish exile. Back then, it was 70 years of Jewish exile. Nevertheless, there was still all sorts of issues within the Jewish people in terms of observance and stuff like this. But Ezra and Nehemiah leads people back, and the people who come with Ezra and Nehemiah are these people who are not all that connected. However, they come back, and so for a while they're starting to build up the land, they're starting to build up Jerusalem. And then after maybe 20 years, if I remember correctly, so then they begin a teshuvah movement with those people. They begin an idea of, okay, leaving the negative ways, getting more in touch with their true Jewish identity and what that means in Jewish observance and Torah and mitzvot. And so there starts to be a teshuvah movement, a movement back towards Torah and Judaism. Okay, after that generation, a student of Ezra, the main student of Ezra, was somebody by the name of Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous. And he was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. He takes over the leadership after Ezra and Nehemiah pass away. And he's the Kohen Gadol. And you might have heard of Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous, because famously he said in Perkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, the world stands on three things, ala Torah, ala Avodah, ala Gemilut Chasadim. On Torah, on avoda, on spiritual work, and on gemilut chasadim, and on acts of kindness. Very, very famous, right? And so he strengthens the fervor and the passion and the commitment of the Jewish people to Torah and mitzvot. And now it's at a place where people are very, very righteous. Now, at the same time that Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous, was strengthening the Jewish establishment over there in Jerusalem. So at the same time, in a land far, far away, in a place called Macedonia, there was a king. And this king of Macedonia had a son. Now, when this king of Macedonia had a son, he and all of the people around him, his officers and the people who were the experts that were around him, the astrologers, the astronomers, when they looked at the different signs and they looked at the kid, and this kid, one eye is green, one eye is brown, and the different signs and the stars and how everything lines up, these people are like, yo, king, you have no idea what kind of son, what kind of, I don't know if they use the word soul, but what kind of son has come down to you. This kid, if you put in effort and give him the proper education and the proper training in life and everything, this kid is going to be a 1 in a million. This kid's going to be a 1 in a billion. Don't ruin my punchline. This kid's going to be a 1 in a billion. And so sure enough, this kid, the king has all sorts of possibilities at his disposal in the kingdom, right? So he gets the best teachers and the best trainers and everything. And sure enough, by age 3, this kid can already read, write, and do arithmetic like a 15-year-old. This kid already, even though he's 3 years old, this kid's got the skills and the way of speaking like a 15-year-old. By age 6, already no one in the entire kingdom of Macedonia can teach this kid. And so back then, if you want to send someone to get a higher level education, where would you send them? Answer, Greece. You send them to Greece. In particular, you send them to the university in Greece, headed by the famous philosopher Aristotle. And sure enough, the king sends his Aristo. Sure enough, the king sends his son at age 6 to university in Greece. Okay? And so he starts to learn from Aristotle. Now we have to understand who Aristotle was for our purposes, our conversation here as Jews today discussing the Chanukah story. Okay? For our purposes and understanding, Aristotle's philosophy was, yes, there is a God, right? Because look around this world. Clearly there's a designer, there's a physical world. Everything physical must come from something that created it. So go back to the beginning of the system. What created the physical? You don't have to be a genius or a mathematical wizard to figure out that there needs to be something that's outside the laws of the finite, outside the laws of time and space, outside the laws of physical, which created time and space, and that which is in it, which created the physical. So Aristotle claimed, as so many of the non-Jewish nations around us throughout our history have claimed, that yes, there is a God, but Azav Elohim et haaretz, like it says in Tanakh in the Jewish Bible, that yes, there is a God, but God has left the land, that he wound up the clock and he put it on the shelf, that yes, he created the world, but then he put the world on autopilot called nature. And so Aristotle's philosophy was that the entire purpose, our entire purpose in life, or really all we can achieve in life, is to learn the most we can about nature in order to become masters over nature, in order to rule over nature, in order to get the most pleasure out of the natural world that the world has to offer. And so this became such an extreme. He was such a believer in this philosophy, and the Greeks were such believers in this philosophy. They took this to such an extreme that what if there was someone who came into the world who could not get the most out of the natural, who could not get the most physical pleasures like everybody else, right? What if someone had a birth defect? What if someone was handicapped? What if someone got really old? So what a waste of resources on this guy. He can't do it. He can't get what the world is offering. He can't get what this world is all about, just get the most out of the physical world. What a chaval, what a waste on the resources this person's taken up, what a waste of air this guy's breathing. We got to get rid of this guy. And sure enough, that's what they would do. They would drown such people, as is well known and documented. And this is what they would do at Sparta and all of these other places in ancient Greece, which for some reason Westernism looks up, Western world looks up to, but this is what they would do. Okay. Now, remember, at the same time, in a land far, far away in Jerusalem, right, you had Shimon HaTzadik was preaching Simon the Righteous at the same time. Head of the Jewish people in Jerusalem was preaching Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omed. The world stands on 3 things: Al HaTorah, V'al HaAvodah, V'al HaGemilut Chasadim. On Torah, on spiritual work and on acts of kindness. Okay, so if we could sum up Aristotle's philosophy, was the world stands on three things: al hateva, v'al hateva, v'al hateva, on the natural, on the natural, on the natural. And so yes, okay, you know, Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous, and Judaism in general is not against the natural. We're down with it, but we understand that the natural is also a means to an end, whereas they looked at it as like there's no other means. There's no physical as a means to spiritual ends. The physical is the ends into themselves. And so anyway, Aristotle was teaching, and so this prince of Macedonia, the king's son, learned by Aristotle in university from age 6 for 10 years. 10 years in, a messenger came from Macedonia to say, your father, the king, is very, very sick. And so sure enough, the prince at age 16 and a half, gets up, returns to Macedonia. His father passes away. And of course, who's going to become king of Macedonia now? Him. First of all, he's the next in the throne, but also everybody knows about this kid and his crazy abilities and wisdom. And like, yeah, everyone points everyone points their finger at this kid and says, you be king. And so sure enough, this person becomes king. And of course, this person famously is known today as Alexander the Great. And Alexander, of course, what do you do if Greece has played host to you for 10 years from age 6 to 16, so that you can learn by one of the great philosophers of all time? So as soon as you become king of Macedonia, of course, what do you do to repay Greece? Yes, that's right. You go and take it over. You go and conquer it, right? So sure enough, this is what he does. Alexander takes over Macedonia as the king. He becomes king of Macedonia, and he begins to teach new war strategies and tactics to his army. And he goes ahead and he enters in with his small army and manages to take over the Greek army. But then what does he do? He takes the Greek army, adds it to his army, and now he's the strongest army, the smartest army, and the most numerous army that the world has ever seen up until that point. And sure enough, he goes out to conquer and conquer and conquer. He conquers, most of Europe, Syria, Egypt. But hold on a second. Wait, what's that? What's between Syria and Egypt? Israel. Very good. That brings us to the next part of our story. Sure enough, Alexander travels with his people, and he lands with his boat, with his ships. He lands at the port in Caesarea, aka Caesarea. For those who are familiar, anyone who hasn't been there, you should totally check it out. Awesome, awesome beach. I've even been to a couple of weddings over there on that beach. You should totally check it out. Now, Alexander lands over there on Caesarea, and here is what happens. Okay, he is approached by a messenger of the Shomronim, aka the Sumerians in English. Now, who were the Shomronim? The Shomronim, let's understand, we need to do a little bit of a history lesson, because the Shomronim had been there at this point for a number of generations. However, let's understand who they were. Before the Babylonians had taken over Israel and destroyed the first temple and all of this, before that, there was an empire known as the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire. Now, what the Assyrian Empire did when they would take over people is that they would, in order to break their spirits, the spirits of the people that they would take over, they would do a population transfer. They would take over a certain area, and then they would take all the people who lived there and transfer them somewhere else in the empire, and then move in another group of people from a different location into the location that they were in. Why? Because it breaks the spirit of the people, right? If people are living freely, then you have some kind of occupying force that comes in and takes over. So you remember the good old days when you didn't have these people, these other foreign forces bothering you, and you yearn to rebel and overthrow the occupying force. However, so in order to break that spirit, so these Assyrians, what they would do is they would exile people from their land and put them in another location. And so the Assyrians were successful in destroying some of the Jewish kingdom. The northern Israel, they managed to take over. It's a whole story in Tanakh and the Jewish Bible. Not going to go into it now. But if you've ever heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, if you ever heard of the 10 lost tribes of the Jewish people, this is how the 10 lost tribes became the 10 lost tribes. The Assyrians took over and exiled different parts of the Jewish people. And in particular now, we're talking about the area of Israel called the Shomron, Samaria, which is basically north of Jerusalem, south of the Galilee, south of, in between there. He took people and really in the story, he took people from north of there as well, and he sent them into different locations throughout the Assyrian Empire. But of course, in that area of Samaria, there's crops from that were growing and all sorts of things, and these are all things that that the Assyrians can make money off of, and tax and all sorts of things. So why should we let that go to waste? They brought in another group of people to be in the Shomron, in this area of Israel called Samaria. And so he brought in people called they're from a place called Kuta, which is from, now it's northern Iraq kind of area. They brought in these people called the Kutim from northern Iraq, and he put them there. So now listen, here's what happened later on, a number of years later. So hold on, I got to tell you what happened with these people, right? So when these people were put into Israel, crazy thing happened. Now, any of you who have been to Israel, you're very aware that we have an issue with cats over here. There are cats all over the place. The reason why there are cats is because previously there were rats, and people figured, okay, let's get in cats in order to get rid of the rats. And now we have a cat issue. I think there was also a theory to bring in dogs in order to get rid of the cats, but I think they decided, you know what, let's not just go up the chain to, let's not do that. So they stopped at cats. So if you think, though, that we have a cat problem now, you should have seen what they had back then. Because when these Shomronim, these Samaritans got transferred into the land of Israel, so they had a lion problem. Much bigger issue, lion problem. Lions started to come and ripping people apart. And so these Samaritans, they sent letters and messengers back to the king of the emperor of the Assyrians, saying, listen, this land of Israel, it does not tolerate foreigners. You got to transfer us somewhere else. And so the Assyrian leader said, you're not going anywhere. Listen, if the land won't tolerate foreigners, so become a little less foreign. We're going to send you some rabbis. They'll teach you how to become better Jews, Israelites, whatever, and you won't be such a foreigner. So sure enough, the Assyrians did send some Jewish people with some kind of knowledge, but these weren't necessarily the most orthodox rabbis. They were flexodox rabbis. And sends them, and sure enough, they do start to teach them a little bit of a little bit Torah, a little bit Shabbat, a little bit kosher, And sure enough, these Samaritans, they go ahead and they actually do some kind of conversion to Judaism. And there's a whole discussion in the Talmud. Well, hold on a second. Was this conversion legit? Or to put it in the Talmudic terms, the way they had the discussion, were they gerei emet, or were they gerei arayot? Were they true converts, or were they lion converts? What's the difference? True convert is, okay, I'm joining Judaism because either I believe in the truth of Judaism, or I feel an association, an affiliation with the Jewish people, and I want to join up. Or were they lion converts, meaning they thought that, okay, I got to do this little trick in order to get rid of the lions. It's not that I'm in, or I'm a believer or anything like that, right? And so, of course, the maskana, the conclusion of the Talmud is essentially that they were gerei arayot, lion converts, and so therefore they were not really accepted as Jews. So now here, when later on, years later, when the Jewish people do start to return to the land of Israel after the rest of the Jews were exiled to Babylonia later on, right? It was the Syrians, then the Babylonians, and then the Persians took over from them, and the Persians allowed the Jews to come back in. And so some Jews from Babylonia came back, and so the Shomronim were there, and they were saying, "Oh, we're the real Jews. We're the chosen people." And the Jews were like, "Hold on a second. You guys are from Kuta. You guys are from northern Iraq. We know you're from there. You know you're from there. What are we talking about over here? No, you guys are not. You guys are not. We're the Jewish people. You're not Jewish people, right?" And so Samaritans did not like this very much. And so as the Jewish people returned during the generation of Ezra and Nehemiah started to build up Jerusalem, build up Jerusalem, build up the wall around Jerusalem, the second temple, etc., all this stuff. So the Sumerians would start attacking. They start at first, like it said, and this is all recorded in the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Tanakh, that the Sumerians would attack at night, and so then the Jewish people would have guards, and then the Jewish people, and so then they said, okay, the Jewish people have guards at night, we'll attack during the day. So they started also attacking during the day, and so basically they were a thorn in the side of the Jewish people. And so now when Alexander shows up, the Sumerians say, here's our chance to get rid of these Jews finally once and for all. And so they say, Alexander, we welcome you with open arms. We welcome you with open arms. We accept your ideals, we accept your kingdom, etc. But there are these people down south, these Jews, these Israelites down south. They're in Jerusalem, and they're building their temple, and they're cursing you, and they want your downfall, they want your destruction. And of course, this wasn't actually true, that Jewish people in the temple, yes, there's a temple, is considered to be a temple in Jerusalem, is a place where we pray for the peace of all nations. But anyway, so Alexander hears this, and he's like, all right, sounds like these guys are going to be my first stop. And so Alexander's camping out there, planning to head down to destroy the Jews in Jerusalem. Now, Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous, leader of the Jewish people in Jerusalem, he gets wind of this. How does he know? That I cannot answer you. Was it divine inspiration? Did he have some kind of messenger? I cannot answer you. That I don't know. But he gets wind of what's going on, and he gathers up 80 Kohanim, 80 priests, 80 Kohanim, let's just call them, we don't get confused here. 80 Kohanim of the Jewish people from the temple, everyone, they all put on their white garb, and they start heading up to go meet and talk and speak it out or approach Alexander. And so sure enough, there they are, they're camped out, the Greeks camped out, Macedonians, Greeks, so I'm going to call them Greeks, are camped out by Caesarea, and sure enough, they see, there's someone who's on lookout to see what's going on. They see, and so he sees these 80 Jews in white approaching the Jewish people. Approaching the Greeks, and says, "Oh my God, he's coming!" And so he tells Alexander. He wakes up Alexander. He tells him that there's people coming. Alexander's like, "What? People are approaching me? People are starting over me. They're going to start war with me. All right, everybody after me, right?" So he gets into his chariot, and everyone's following. And when they did war back in the day, it wasn't like the king or the president goes 400 feet underground to some war room. No, in order to motivate his people, he's out there in front leading the charge. And so sure enough, he gets into the chariot, and they start charging towards that band of 80 Jews. Now they're charging towards, and as soon as Alexander gets close enough to be able to see the face of Shimon HaTzadik, of Simon the Righteous, as soon as he sees his face, he goes, "Whoa, stop!" Slows everybody, gets his entire band of people to stop. He gets off of his chariot, and he bows down to Shimon HaTzadik, bows down to Simon the Righteous. And so an officer standing next to him is, Your Majesty, you okay? What are you doing? You're bowing down to this old man? Now, keep in mind, Alexander, I would assume, never bowed down to anybody. And of all people, to bow down to an old man, someone who can't get the most physical out of the physical world. And so Alexander's answer was this. Alexander said back to him that anytime I go out to war, anytime we go out to war and we're victorious, there's this image that I see, and I always know that it's because of this image that we win the war. And I never knew what this image was. But here, this person's face, that's the image. So I shouldn't bow down. And so Alexander gets up and goes over to Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous, says, "But why do you want our downfall? Why are you cursing us? Why do you want us to fail?" And so Simon the Righteous says, "Hold on a second. I never said that. Did you perhaps meet, I know where you might have gotten such an idea from. Did you perhaps meet someone from the Shomronim, from the Sumerians?" And so Alexander figured out very quickly what was going on. And Alexander said, "Okay, So listen, you guys, you continue. I'm going to leave your temple intact. I'm going to leave your Beit HaMikdash intact. I'm going to leave everybody okay over here. Leave them be. Leave your whole settlement operation here intact. You guys continue with your Torah, your Avodah, your Gemilut Chasadim, your Torah, your spiritual work, your acts of kindness. You do your thing. And yeah. Okay. Hang on, everybody. Pause 1 second for the story interruption. Hold on a second. Okay, fine. And so, friends, he says, you guys go ahead and continue doing your thing. And so sure enough, not really known, Alexander the Great, not really known for this, but he lets them be, and he goes and makes a U-turn back, I don't know if it's a U-turn, makes a left, whatever, and he goes towards the Samaritans, the Shomronim, and that is the last we've heard from the Shomronim, from the Samaritans. Now, yes, there's still pockets of them, a few here and there to this day, but the idea of them being a problem for the Jewish people, that was the last we've heard of them. Now also because of the story, because Alexander let the Jewish people be, let the temple be, as a show of thanks and honor for him, every Jewish boy that was born that year was named Alexander. Okay? Every Jewish boy that year was named Alexander. And that explains how you find that Alexander is very much in the Jewish nation. You find it, you find people with the name Alexander in the Hasidic community, certainly 100, 200 years ago. So Alexander obviously is not a Jewish name. If you're ever wondering how Alexander got in there, this is how. Also, I believe personally this might answer why, if you know any Jewish Russians, the chances of them being named Alexander or Alex or Sasha, which somehow is a Russian translation of Alex, is extremely, extremely high, because during the times of the USSR persecution of the Jewish people, persecution of many people, but that included Jews, included trying to root out Judaism, and included not allowing Jewish practice, and so you had to hide your Judaism. So a lot of people wanted to name a Jewish name, but didn't want, it wasn't allowed to name a Jewish name, or they didn't want that people should know they were Jewish. So how do you name a Jewish name without naming a Jewish name? Very simple. You name Alexander, and then you name Alex, and then you name Alexa, and then you name Sasha, and then you name another Sasha, and you're good to go. You have your whole family. Okay. So now this story is everything. The story I just told you is brought in the Talmud, and also brought in the book of Josephus. Josephus is an academic scholarly work of history that is well known. So anyway. Now, years pass. Hi, everybody. Years pass, and these generals that are next to Alexander, some of his top officers, they just get sick and tired of all the war all the time. They've just had enough. And so somebody or a group of people poison Alexander. Either it was his officers or it was relatives. But somebody poisons Alexander, and with a poison that's supposed to knock him off in a few hours. It takes, though, a few days, because Alexander's on another level. But still, eventually, he succumbs to the poison. And so around age 32, age 33, after about 17 years of just straight war, Alexander passes away. So who takes over the empire, the massive empire that Alexander has built? Who takes over that empire after Alexander? Who is the one person who can take it over? Answer? That is correct. There was no one. So what they did was they split it up. And one general took over Europe. One general took over Greece, one general took over Syria, one general took over Egypt. Now, even though Alexander let the Jewish people be and left them intact, still there was a new energy and aura in the world. There was the spirit of Greekism, Hellenism that was getting out there. And so, that culture, it just somehow it just seeps in there. And so sure enough, at first, of course, so even in the land of Israel, that's what I'm trying to share with you. Even though he let the Jewish people be, still they start getting influenced and I shouldn't even say influenced at first, interested in the Greek philosophy and the Greek ideas and ideals and way of thinking and culture and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, they didn't abandon their Judaism all at once. At first, it was 90% Torah, 10% Greekism. But once you get 90%, 10%, then of course, you're going to 70 Torah, 30 Greek. And then eventually, you're getting to 50-50. And then you guessed it, 10% Torah, 90% Greekism, Hellenism. Let's just be clear, when we talk about Hellenism, we're not just talking about secularism or just or not being religious because a person is disinterested or not inspired or finds it difficult. No, what we're talking about is an ideal, that there's an ideal to be a part of the Greek melting pot, of take on their new, modern, progressive ideas. I mean, it's the year, 100 BCE, for God's sake, get with the times. It's modern times now. So this is what happens. Now, we have a spiritual rule in Judaism, and that is that when the Jewish people exchange their ideals for another nation's ideals, that other nation now has a hold over them, now can go ahead and rule over them. And so sure enough, a generation later, that's just to be clear who we're talking about. You had Alexander. Alexander passed away. Remember that his empire was divided up. The first leader of the general that took over Syria. Remember, this is all the Greek culture. So there's Greek Syria, Greek Egypt, Greek Greece, and Greek Europe. Okay, so this is Greek Syria. The general that took over there was somebody by the name of Antiochus. Okay, so not that Antiochus, but after that Antiochus, there was a second person named Antiochus the second. By the way, Antiochus isn't necessarily a name. It could be a title, like Pharaoh, and Torah isn't necessarily the name of the person. It's a title, right? It's a matter of president. So now we have the 45th president, right? So that, again, it's the same thing. Not Antiochus. There's Antiochus the first. Now we have Antiochus the second. So this person, Antiochus the second, he wakes up one morning. He looks down south to Israel. And it's like, why didn't Alexander take over there? There's not enough Greekism over there. We got to go ahead and get some more Greekism down there. And so sure enough, Antiochus, just like that, begins the first religious persecution in all of world history. And I'm open to hear if you have another example of it, but I'm pretty sure that is the first religious persecution in all of world history. Now, what do I mean by that? By religious persecution, what I mean is that he wasn't looking to take over land. He wasn't looking to slaughter some other foreign people. No problem. You want to be there, you can live there. You want to have your synagogue, have your synagogue. Just put in a Zeus next to the Aron Kodesh. That's all I need. That's all I need. Listen, man, don't be such an extremist. It's modern times. Hey, come on, just put in a little Zeusy. What's the problem? So sure enough, so these Jews, of course, the ones that wouldn't accept it. So first, let's just understand how this happened. It was one thing after another, right? It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to ban all of Judaism all at once. That's not how it happened. At first, it started like this. It started like, listen, man, just put in a Zeus with it, acknowledge us as well. Don't be such an extremist. Don't be such a, So at first, the first decree that was really given to the Jewish people, the first decree from the Greeks against the Jews was a ban on three things: Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, which is something we celebrate in the beginning of every month, and Brit Milah, circumcision. Now, from a Kabbalistic perspective, this is actually very deep. Whether they realize it or not, what they were doing was attacking the Jewish people and spirituality on all three dimensions of how the world is created. According to Kabbalah, one of the earliest books of Kabbalah is called the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation. And in there at the beginning, it says that the world is created in three dimensions: space, time, and being. Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, like it says in Hebrew, but loosely translated as space, time, and being, person, soul. Okay? So the idea is that an attack at Shabbat, outlawing Shabbat, what's Shabbat all about? Shabbat, we celebrate Shabbat, and one of the main reasons is because it's an acknowledgement, it's a personal testimony to the idea that God created the world, that God created space. So it's an attack on that. And banning Rosh Chodesh, what's Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh is how we determine the Jewish calendar. It's how we know when all the Jewish holidays are. It's an attack on time. And Brit Milah, circumcision, obviously is an attack on being, attack on the soul, attack on the person, right? And so another decree famously that they had was that every Jewish household had to have in it an ox horn. Inscribed on that ox horn has to be written, Ein li chelek be'elokei Yisrael. I do not have a portion in the God of Israel. Why an ox horn? Well, I didn't know for a long time, but then I heard an explanation. And maybe if you saw Flintstones enough times, maybe you saw this in Flintstones, I don't know. But what is an ox horn? An ox horn back then, I guess, was a baby's bottle. And so that the baby should be getting its food, its nourishment from something that has inscribed in it, I have no portion in the God of Israel. Right? And so it got to such an extreme, and of course, eventually all Torah and Judaism was banned eventually. But it got to such an extreme that you hear these crazy stories that happen. I'll give you one very famous one about Hana and her 7 children. A woman named Hana and her 7 sons. And the story goes like this, that this family, Hana and her 7 sons, were brought before Antiochus. And what that means is not just in front of him some private quarters, right? It's in front of his theater of people, everyone's munching and having a feast and whatever. And this was, I guess, supposed to be kind of the part of the entertainment. And he basically brought in, he started with the oldest son and said, bow down to this idol or you are going to die in a very torturous way. Now, just for a little bit of religious background on this, in Judaism, there is an idea that if a person says, do this thing that's not allowed in Judaism, or I'm going to kill you, usually the truth is that according to Judaism, we are supposed to violate Judaism in that situation because there's a verse in the Torah which says, V'chai bahem, live by the commandments. And the Talmud explains that it says, live by the commandments, meaning don't die by them. However, based on a bunch of different verses, I'm not going to go into all the details now, there are 3, or you could really say 4 exceptions to this rule. If someone puts a gun to your head and says, kill that person or I'm going to kill you, murder that person or I'm going to kill you, in that case, you have to bite the bullet. Murder is one of the things that you're not allowed to do, even if someone's got a gun to your head talking about killing you. Another one is idolatry, which is, of course, the one we're talking about here. That's on the list of the big 3. And another one is certain sexual sins. We won't go into the details on that one right now. Now, there is also one additional point, which is that if someone tells you to do anything in Judaism that you're not allowed to do, no matter what it is, but they're doing it in a way that it's totally public for the purpose of blotting out and uprooting Judaism. So then in that case, even that case, you would also supposed to be biting the bullet in that case. Well, anyway, this story here had obviously 2 of them, 2 of these things, right? Number 1 is idolatry, right? And then also, this whole thing that's going down in public, right? And so, there you go. So this son very heroically says, I'm not going to do it. And sure enough, this person is killed a very torturous way. I believe he was cooked alive and then dismembered. It wasn't pretty. Second son, Antiochus gets the second son and says, you saw what happened to your brother, bow down to this idol or else you're going to meet a similar fate. And the second son also stands strong and is killed in a very torturous way. And this continues, 3rd son, 4th son, 5th son, 6th son. gets the seventh son. This kid's just a little kid, 9 years old, 12 years old, something like that. And Antiochus says, listen, you saw what happened to your brothers. You want the same fate? If you don't, so bow down to this idol, or you're going to meet a similar fate. And so the child refuses to bow down to the idol. And so Antiochus starts to bribe him and say, okay, listen, if you bow down to this idol, I'm going to give you, what do you mean? It's more torturous. It's more torturous if Hana has to watch the whole thing. So he says, listen, if you bow down, I'm going to make you, a ruler, and I'm going to give you lots of riches and whatever. So the kid stands strong. Hold on, I'll look at the question a minute. I can't see it all. And so the kid stands strong in that situation. And so Antiochus says, listen, man, it's not going to be pretty. I'm going to, you're going to be killed, you're going to be tortured. You saw what just happened to your brothers. And so he said, and Antiochus says, as a sign of my great mercy and compassion, I will now give the mother a few minutes with her son privately to talk some sense into him so that he will bow down to the idol. And so this son is brought to his mother, Hana, and Hana says to the son, do as your brothers did. And so sure enough, he continues to refuse to bow down. And so Antiochus says to the son, so listen, here he says, I'll make you a deal. You see this ring that I'm wearing on my finger here? Well, it has a little idol in it. What I'll do is I'll drop it on the floor. You bend down to pick it up and give it back to me. I can say that you bow down to the idol. You could say you were just picking up the ring. Everybody wins. Can you imagine the big emperor trying to cut a deal with a 9-year-old? Because he doesn't want to lose face as someone who couldn't break the spirit of the Jewish people. But sure enough, that kid stands strong, and he too ultimately is killed in a torturous way. At that moment, Hana the mother prays for three things. She prays for the souls of her sons. She prays for the strength of the Jewish people, and she prays that she should die before the Greeks can get to her and do anything to her. And so sure enough, with that, she takes her last breath and she collapses, and she dies as well. And so many, of course, throughout Jewish history, we've had many stories like these, many heroic stories like these. But this is what was going on back then. And 52 years of Antiochus attempting to assimilate the Jewish people as much as he could. At some point, though, after 52 years of this, there is a family known as the Hashmonaim. And they realize we got to get out of this. We got to get out of this before, who knows what's going to be with Judaism. Of course, we know that God says the Jewish people are going to be an eternal nation. So it's kind of his problem. He has to work out how that's going to happen. But from our side of it, we have to do our best to strengthen and grow Jewishly. How's that? And we see that, we got to do something, he says. The Hashmonaim say. And so, but what should we do? What can we do? And what's going to be the solution? And so they realize, what's the solution? The same way we got into this problem is the same way we're going to get out of this problem. We got into this problem with a spiritual downfall. What we need is a spiritual uptick. And so what that means is that we need to double down on Judaism, on our Jewish identity, on our Jewish practice with self-sacrifice. And so they go into caves and they hide and they're practicing Judaism, etc., as much as they can on the DL, and with great self-sacrifice. And this is where you hear stories like this about the dreidel, about the sivivon, right? The little top that we spin on Chanukah. Where does that come from? That comes from stories like this, that you'd see there would be different Jews groups sitting there talking Torah or whatever, but some Greek officer would come by and they'd say, hey, you, what's that you're talking about? Are you talking about Torah? And they'd say, oh, no. We're just playing this little game with the spinning the top. And that's all we're doing. That's what we're talking about. And now, of course, the ironic thing is that back then they were really talking Torah and they were spinning the top for show. Now, when we can actually really be learning and talking Torah, now we really are just spinning the top. Anyway, the year is 167 BCE. The place, Modi'in, right between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. A Greek general walks into a little shul over there, a little Jewish enclave over there, And he says, today we are going to sacrifice a pig on the altar, which of course is not allowed for numerous reasons. And he says this to the leader over there. And the leader over there, his name was Matisyahu, just happens to be the one who's leading this Jewish undercover movement, this grassroots movement to double down on Judaism. And so Matisyahu just lets him in on the fact that no, today we are not going to be killing this pig. Today we are going to be killing you. And so Matisyahu chops off this Greek general's head and says, Mi Lashem Elai. Whoever calls out, whoever is for God, follow me. And so the Jewish people, they head out to, someone's very excited by this, and they head out, to the hilltops. They head out to the caves. They head out to the forest, and everybody, of course, anyone in the town comes along, whether by hook or by crook. I think they realize that like the Greeks are going to get wind of what just happened, and they're going to come for reprisals and basically destroy the whole town. So whether they wanted to or not, I think they go and they join up, and other people from the surrounding towns hear what's going on, and they leave their towns and they come and join up, and all of a sudden you have a whole movement. And these people, headed by these people, were known as the Maccabees. The Maccabees. What is a Maccabee? Maccabee is an acronym in Hebrew, meaning Mi Kamocha Be'ilim Adonai. Who is like you among the powers, O God? And that becomes, they are known by Maccabees because this is their rallying cry. This becomes their rallying cry. And so they're headed up by the father, Matisyahu, and his 5 sons. Yehuda, that's famously Jewish, Judah HaMaccabee, Elazar, Yochanan, Yonatan, and Shimon. And maximum estimates, we're talking about 12,000 men, totally untrained. This is not their gig, usually, fighting world powers and whatnot. And they're going up against the top army in all of human history at that time, right? And so miraculously, within 2 years, they manage to take over Jerusalem, and they reinaugurate the temple. They clean it out and they reinaugurate it. And by the way, that is the most simple reason and simple understanding about why this holiday is called Chanukah, because Chanukah means Chanukah Rabayit, for example, we even do today, an inauguration of the house. It's the reinauguration of the temple. That's what the word Chanukah means. And so they reinaugurate the Beit HaMikdash, and they find all of the oil unusable, ritually impure, except they find one flask, and they light the menorah. And even though one flask had enough oil for 1 day, it lasts for 8 days. What is the significance of this? Well, one spiritual significance is you have to understand what the number 8 is in Judaism. In order to understand number 8, let's start with number 6. 6 is the concept of the physical to its fullness. Right, left, front, back, up, down, 6 directions. However, those directions, in order to be a direction, you need to have a midpoint, right? Well, actually, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but let's just understand that the number 7 is the concept of that spiritual midpoint, that point of reference, that thing that actually exists at the core. For example, right is only right to the extent it's to right of me. If I move over 5 steps that way, what I just called right over here, I now call left, right? So what does that mean? What does that mean? That means that there's something that the thing that really exists is that the point of reference, and everything else is a bounce off of the point of reference. So similarly, we understand the spiritual and the physical in Judaism. Spiritual is at the core, physical is the expressions on the outside. And so whatever, that's its own class. We're not going to get into that too much, but that's the concept of number 7. You see that this is the concept of nature in Judaism. The concept of nature in Judaism actually includes a spiritual component. It means that there's a physical world with a spiritual root, a spiritual essence at its core. This is the concept of Shabbat as well. That's why you have 6 days of the week, and you have the 7th day, which is holy. And then also that serves to be the root, the spiritual root of the next 6 days that follow. So that's 7. So 6 is the concept of fullness of the physical. 7 is the concept of the natural, which is a spiritual, which is a physical with a spiritual component. And number 8 is above the natural, limala min hateva, above the natural. And so we see that this is why also Brit Milah, this is one reason why Brit Milah, circumcision, is done. Ideally, if it works out, if the kid's healthy, on the 8th day, right? Because a person naturally comes into this world one way, and what we are doing is adding on to that in a way that also symbolizes and signifies the idea of having ownership and mastery and being above your physical desires, right? Which is one of the things that Brit Milah is all about. And so also, by the way, you see this idea of understanding number 8. It also exists in the secular culture as well. What is their symbol for infinity? The infinity in modern secular culture is a sideways 8. They steal everything from us. You see this? Okay. So anyway, so people think that, listen, the story ended there. People think, okay, great, the Jews, they chucked the Greeks out of Jerusalem, they reinaugurated the temple, they all live happily ever after. You might have thought that. If you did, you would be mistaken, my friends. The fighting continues for 25 more years until the year 142 BCE. When finally the Greeks get tired of the rebellion and they make a treaty with the lone surviving Maccabee from that original family, Shimon Simon the Maccabee, the only survivor from that original family. So you might think that the story actually ends there. But I beg to differ. People think like, oh, look, we won the war. We won the battle, perhaps, but did we really win the war? Did we really win the war? I wonder, right? Because what today, nowadays, what is a Maccabee today? What out there is referred to as Maccabee today, right? So I'll give you a few examples, right? So we have the Maccabee Games, right? What are the Maccabee Games? The Jewish Olympics, right? What is it? What were the Maccabees fighting against, by the way? Greek culture, emphasis on the physical, making a big deal out of sports and culture and all this stuff, and making that the ideal and the pinnacle and what life is all about. And now we're calling Maccabee by what the Greeks were pushing. What else is Maccabee? In Israel, you have a beer company. Hey, now we can watch the Maccabee Games with the Maccabee beer. And of course, if you want your healthcare here in Israel, one of your healthcare services, there's 4 of them. One of the healthcare things are referred to, if you want to know that you're going to be big and strong, that's Maccabee, right? So Maccabee is also a healthcare company. I don't know if you call it a company, but one of your healthcare tracks here in Israel. So I tend to wonder who really won the war, right? At a time when a couple of years ago, I get an invite on Facebook for a Greek Chanukah party, come dressed as Greek god or goddess. Did we really win? Did we really win? I don't know, man. But interestingly enough, I'm not alone in this wonderment. A couple hundred years ago, there's a Hasidic master called the Bnei Yisachar, Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov, who asked a very deep question, which is, what is that religious thing that we read on the holiday of Chanukah? You know, on Passover, we read certain sections of the Torah that talk about the Jewish people leaving Egypt. On Purim, we read the scroll of Esther, the Purim story. What is that religious thing that we read on Chanukah? Answer, you guys all just answered it. The answer is nothing. We don't read anything. So Bnei Yisachar asked the question, why is it that on Chanukah we're not reading anything about Chanukah? He answers very simply, because when do you write the story of what happened? After the story's over. The story's not over, right? And we see that the story's not over because you think about it, Greek culture, after the Greeks came the Romans. The Romans, there's not really Roman culture. Romans just took the Greek culture and pushed it further. And then, of course, we can also see how modern Western culture is also an outgrowth of that. So the war of ideals does continue. And that's another meaning of what Chanukah is. Chanukah means, from the word chinuch, education. It's a preparation and an education for an ongoing the ongoing war of ideals that is out there. Matter of fact, the person who led us in this original war in Chanukah, we said, was somebody by the name of Matityahu. If you do the gematria, you check out the numerical value of the name Matityahu, it is the same numerical value as the words of Beit HaMikdash, which means the temple. Because as we're looking to get to that third Beit HaMikdash, that third temple, which God willing will be here any moment now, the way we're going to get there is by learning the lessons of fighting for it, of fighting for ideals, of knowing who we are, of not compromising on that we learned from Matityahu, who showed us how to fight for it. And so what Chanukah is all about is, as we go into, which Chanukah is about going into, it's the last holiday basically for 2,000 years, but historically, not in the Jewish calendar, but historically, it's the most recent holiday that we have. So as we go into that dark period of exile, we have to know who we are. We have to light that light in that darkness of knowing who we are, knowing what we're about, right? Is Jewish identity about bagels and lox and gefilte fish? Or is Jewish identity about knowing who we are, what we stand for, the ideals we're pushing, the beliefs we're pushing, understanding that we're about, yes, we're down with the physical world, but for a spiritual purpose, not physical for its own sake. We understand that we look to the Torah for our ideals, for our definition of what's good and what's not good, and to not be carried off by whatever modern times and whatever the modern times says, right? People like to say, oh, it's modern times now. Let me tell you a secret. There's never been a point in history that was not modern times. You ever think about that? It's 2020, man. Okay, it was 1920 and 1920. They were saying the same thing. Well, they probably weren't that dumb to say back then either, because they realized that every moment in time, it was that moment in time. Great. So anyway, this is really what Chanukah is all about. It's about having a proper chinuch, a proper education, a proper knowing who we are. Education isn't about information. It's about the culture we're living with. What is the thing we're looking up to? What is the thing we're idealizing, right? Think about what the posters that were on your wall in your room. That's telling you, like, that's what we're, right, growing up. That's what we're looking at, right? So okay, so maybe as we grow older, we get a deeper understanding about our identity. Maybe we can I don't know, reconsider, revamp, take a look at, reflect what those ideals or who those role models can and ought to be, and to consider our identity, our future, the choices we make in a more real way, in a more serious way. Because a lot of times it's so funny, especially when we're in our younger years, in our 20s and whatever, we think that okay, I'm going to make this little decision here, this little decision there. Oh, that's like a nice idealistic thing, but I got to get serious now. These little decisions we're making when we're younger, they change the course of our life. And it means, like, the person I'm married is going to be different based on that. The kids I'm going to have are probably going to be distant based on that. The legacy I'm leaving in this world, I'm writing that right now. And so we should be blessed to take the message of Chanukah in a real way, in a serious way, and really just like to reflect on this idea and this question of our Jewish identity and what it means to me, and to really to take opportunities that we have to learn and to grow and to do great things. All right, my friends, I want to wish everyone a beautiful, wonderful Chanukah.